students, we have made it, ladies and gentlemen. We have made it to the fifth and final kingdom of organisms on planet Earth in our journey of taxonomy. Yes, we have discussed so far, and I wonder how many of them you can remember. Our first kingdom that we discussed were the monerans, the bacteria. The second kingdom we discussed were the protists, those one-celled critters that were pretty cool. The third kingdom that we reviewed were the fungi. The fourth kingdom of organisms were the plants, and that brings us to the fifth and final kingdom of organisms. Basically, we'll be talking about these for the rest of the year. Are the animals, the animal kingdom. And we're going to be dividing this kingdom up as well. And so today we are going to begin this week's topic of animals with invertebrates. Invertebrates will be our topic this week. And as we will discover, invertebrates are a special class of animals. So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. Let's start talking about invertebrates. But before we do, let's just go over some basic characteristics of all organisms that are considered to be animals. So kingdom Animalia, what is it made up of? Perhaps you, when you think of an animal, if I were to ask you, hey, give me an example of an animal, what might you say? Some of the things in this picture might be some of the animals that you give me in a list, such as cows and horses and pigs and sheep and duckies and chickens and doggies and cats and a whole host of other animals as well. But you know what? All of these animals are actually vertebrates. We'll have to wait till next week to learn more about these vertebrates. But let's give a general definition of what an animal is in the first place, okay? Animals can be defined as multicellular. We know what that word means, multicellular. Prefix multi means many. Cellular refers to cells, so many cells. Heterotrophs. Do you remember what a heterotroph is? Did you say an animal or an organism that cannot produce its own food? That's great. By the way, can any of you give me what the antonym of heterotroph is? Autotroph, that's right, like plants, which we just got done talking about. But let's continue with the definition. Multicellular heterotroph whose cells lack cell walls. You recall in the beginning of the year when we started talking about the differences in cells between plants and animals. Plants have cell walls. We just finished up the last 3 topics talking about plants. All of those plants, if we examine them on a cellular level, they all have cell walls. Well, now we're going to be talking about organisms, animals, that do not have cell walls if we examine them on a cellular level. And here are some more examples of animals. And boy, some of these would be really cool mascots for school teams. Like, I think my favorite here is the Eagles. Yeah. But yeah, it'd be kind of cool if we were like the Sharks or something like that. Or the Warthogs. Yeah, I'm a warthog. Or I don't even know what some of these are. What in the world is that? I don't even know what that is. Is it a badger? I'm not sure. Hey, we're the big fat elephants. Woo-hoo! All right, well, let's get back to animals in general here. We're going to discuss 2 major divisions or groups of animals. The first are the ones that we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this week, the invertebrates. And in general, invertebrates are those animals that lack a backbone. They have no spine. These are spineless critters. And they include such things as worms and jellyfish and various types of spiders and insects, squids and flies, sea urchins, starfish, which actually aren't fish at all. Starfish are better, more accurately called sea stars these days. Prawn, like shrimp and crayfish and the like. Snails, oh yeah, the snails. These are examples of invertebrates, and we'll be talking more about them this week. The second group, which we'll hold on to these until next week, are the vertebrates. And the vertebrates are animals that do have a backbone. We, as human beings, are in fact vertebrates. We do have a backbone, but so are these other critters. Various mammals and reptiles, amphibians, these are all different kinds of vertebrates. And what they have all in common is that they have a backbone. So, no backbone, backbone, invertebrates, vertebrates. So, let's begin now with the simplest of all invertebrates. And you remember the taxonomic classification system, kings play cards on fat green stools. The K for kingdom is the biggest taxonomic group. And again, we're on the fifth and final kingdom of organisms, the animal kingdom. And under each of those kingdoms are subgroups, and the first subgroup is called a phylum. So in the animal kingdom, first phylum we're going to discuss today is Phylum Porifera. Say that with me. Phylum Porifera. Yeah, porifera. Pour. Not this kind of pour, not the kind of pour that you like pour syrup on your pancakes in the morning, but pour like this kind of pour. Like, look at your skin. And if you look really close, you might see little holes in your skin. Those are pores. And sometimes your pores can become clogged pores with oil and dirt, and you get those nasty pimples on your face, which, by the way, is terribly common among teenagers. So no need to worry about having pimples, because you're in good company. Just about every teenager on planet Earth gets pimples. It's no big deal. Why? It's because at this point in your lives, when you are experiencing adolescence, your body is going haywire, producing all sorts of things, including various oils to make your skin look young and supple. And so it's not uncommon that when you've got a major production of material trying to come out from the inside, they may get clogged and, could form a pimple. Why am I talking about pimples? Phylum Porifera. Yeah, pores. By the way, isn't that a pretty picture? Look at the beautiful yellow and blue and red and green. That's a really pretty picture. I don't know if you know what that is, but it is an animal. Yeah, you heard me right. I said those are animals in that picture. And no, you don't see any fish swimming around or sharks or porpoises or anything else. But what you are looking at is a collection of animals in Phylum Porifera. And if you look, just look at the yellow one here for a moment. Look at the big hole, and then little holes all over the place here. There's lots and lots of holes, which, by the way, is a characteristic of critters in Phylum Porifera, guess what? They have many holes. You might even say these are the most spiritual critters on planet Earth because they're very holy. All right, I know that was bad. But Phylum Porifera are made of organisms we call pore bearers, meaning they have many holes. Believe it or not, this is what SpongeBob really looks like. This is a yellow sponge. This is a live animal, a sponge, and notice the openings here, the holes, and what you can't really see too well in this picture are all the millions of little holes scattered all around. But this is a living sponge, and it is an animal, more specifically, an invertebrate. And hopefully in the lab this week, we'll be checking out some real sponges close up. All right, so sponges and other organisms in Phylum Porifera, these are the simplest animals that are true animals. They are invertebrates, but they are the simplest invertebrates. And that word simple, if you recall from a few topics back when we talked about primitive plants, the word primitive and simple here mean the same thing. It means that they have very uncomplicated structures. They don't have many structures involved with them. They're very simple. They have very simple structures to them. And of course, they have many pores. And there are other examples of members of Phylum Porifera, but sponges are by far the most common and well-known members of Phylum Porifera. So sponges, how many of you are SpongeBob fans? Who lives in a pineapple under the sea? Who's yellow and porous, absorbent as he? Are you ready, kids? I can't hear you. Are you ready, kids? By the way, I've never watched SpongeBob. It's true. It's true. But SpongeBob is a cartoon example of a sponge, obviously. But again, here's a real living sponge, and they do come in various colors, not just yellow. Here's a blue sponge, and notice all of the openings. We'll discuss later what function all of those openings have, but they do have a very important purpose in the life of a sponge. Now, unlike the cartoon SpongeBob, who evidently runs around and he gets around from place to place, maybe going to, where does he get food? The Krabby's shop or something? I'm not sure. Forgive me if you're a real SpongeBob fan. I really don't watch SpongeBob, but I know he has a friend Patrick, right? The sea star or the starfish, and Mr. Krabby Pants, is that his name? Mr. Crab? I don't know. But anyway, sponges in real life do not have legs and arms like SpongeBob does. Real life sponges, living sponges, they don't get around all that much. At least not in terms of walking, running, or swimming or riding. They do move, but the movement is very minimal movement. Also, an interesting thing about sponges, and I guess SpongeBob likes this topic perhaps, about reproduction. Sponges, I was going to say SpongeBob reproduces. Well, sponges in real life can reproduce both sexually and asexually. So what exactly does that mean? Well, sponges can either reproduce by themselves asexually, which is kind of like the budding of yeast that we learned about in the fungi kingdom, or unicellular protists could reproduce by themselves. That is asexual reproduction. So a sponge like SpongeBob, if SpongeBob were real, he could actually reproduce by himself. So he could lose a little bit of himself, and that little bit of himself would turn into a new sponge. So SpongeBob could have lots and lots of little SpongeBobbies, perhaps. But they can also reproduce sexually, which means the genetic material from two different sponges can combine together to give rise to another genetically more diverse offspring, a little sponge. Think about that. There's some other interesting things about sponges as well. And by the way, this is a real sponge that has been dried. And we humans, we use sponges for lots of things, not only cleaning ourselves, but cleaning dishes and cleaning cars and a whole host of other things as well, because they are so holy and absorbent and hold on to water. They actually work really, really well. The one thing that I find to be fascinating about sponges is that their cells can reorganize. What does that mean? Reorganize. Does that mean they're in disarray and they have to be organized like cards in a deck? No, that's not what it means. What it means is you could push SpongeBob through a cheese grater, through a blender, through a screen or a sifter. You could chop him up into a million bits and pieces. Now, I'm not suggesting you do that to SpongeBob. I don't think SpongeBob would have a smile on his face if we did that to poor Bob. But a real sponge wouldn't care, because after all of the cells of the sponge were disorganized by being chopped up into a flurry of cells, those cells will start to regroup together and reorganize and turn back into a sponge, a multicellular sponge. It's really quite bizarre when you think about it. It reminds me of an old Terminator movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He'll be back. If you have ever seen Terminator, where that other evil dude from the future comes to try and destroy the Terminator, and he's like a liquid mercury dude, and at one point, I think it was the first movie, where he got frozen with the liquid nitrogen truck just spilling all over, and it solidified him, and he broke into a million bits and pieces. And everybody in the theater was like, "Yeah, the bad dude's finally done for." And then he warmed up, and all those little bits and pieces came back together again to form into the bad metal dude. Oh, man. Well, guess what? That's what sponges do in real life. No, they don't go back into travel in time and try and destroy Terminators, but their cells can reorganize. Now, there's a really cool video that I'm going to be linking this to your Google Classroom. So when you're done with the lesson today, this first video that I'm going to ask you to watch shows a sponge being, well, let's just say the sponge is disorganized. And then you can see what happens to the sponge afterwards. So be sure to catch that little video when you are finished with this lesson. But let's continue with sponges with a quick little diagram here. A typical sponge. Now, there are many varieties of sponges, so this is a gross overgeneralization. But the main idea of a sponge's structure is as follows. It's got a main body. It's got a main body, and that main body has a central cavity We saw that central cavity in some of those previous pictures with the big hole in the top. They almost look like toilet paper tubes or paper towel tubes. I don't know why my mind was going there. But, they got a main hole in the middle. It's called the central cavity. And in that central cavity are flagella, singular flagellum, plural flagella. And you may recall talking about flagella in the past when we were talking about bacteria and protists. And it's that squiggly little structure, that tail-like structure that's like a whip and it like moves around. Well, these flagella on the inside of the sponge's central cavity act as like a filter to food that it obtains in a very interesting way. Check this out. There are holes or pores that go around the body of a sponge. We've got the main larger body, or the main larger central cavity hole or pore at the top. Well, here's the deal. As water flows along the top of that central cavity, something very interesting happens. Now, I can't do this with you in person today, but maybe you could do this at home, especially if you have a younger brother or sister that maybe irritates you. You could teach them how a sponge eats. Listen carefully. I'll see if I can find a video clip of this as well to add, but I don't want to get the computer all wet. And so this is what you do. Imagine taking a glass of water or a bottle of water, just a container of water of some kind, and getting a straw. If you've got a straw at home, put the straw into the water. And I would suggest practice this a few times before you actually do it to your younger brother, sister, or somebody else that you might want to get wet without them realizing what's happening. And so you have this bottle of water or this glass of water. You put a straw in the top, and then you pierce your lips. Imagine my finger. I should have brought a straw with me. Oh, I don't have a straw. Imagine my finger is a straw. Right at the top of the straw, you want to pierce your lips, take a deep breath, and go and blow a thin stream of air over the top of the straw. And what happens is you create what's called an atomizer. Old-fashioned perfume bottles used to work this way. And Windex cleaners work this way if you were to disassemble it and see how it actually works. But when you blow air over a straw, you create a vacuum. And instead of the water going down the straw, the water will actually come up the straw from the bottle. And when you blow on it really hard, the water will come up so high that it will come out of the straw. And if you're still blowing over the straw, guess what? It sprays a mist on whatever you're aiming it at. Or whoever you might be aiming it at, if you know what I mean. It's a lot of fun. It'll take a little practice. And while you're doing it, by the way, as the liquid comes up in the straw, it makes a cool sound too. It becomes higher and higher pitch sound, like a whistle blowing, until it becomes such a high pitch because the volume of water is so high, there's no space left except to come out of the straw and get sprayed all over the place. So give it a try. Make it a home activity for yourself tonight. Even if you don't have an annoying younger sibling to do it to, you can just do it over the sink and have fun. It's actually pretty cool. So why am I mentioning this evil little trick? Well, it's because how sponges eat. Check it out. As water flows over the top of the central cavity, it creates vacuum in the central cavity. And because it has many holes elsewhere on its body, water will actually get sucked in through these pores, through the central cavity, and then out the top without it having to do anything other than allowing the water to flow over it. Now, what happens as a result is this: there's little microscopic critters that live in the water in which the sponges survive. And there's these little phytoplankton and zooplankton, little microscopic plants and animals that will inevitably get sucked in through these pores, get trapped by the flagella, and then be consumed by the sponge. So it's actually a really cool technique that sponges use in order to feed. Now, I'm going to stop here for today with this slide and this diagram. I hope you had time to fill in your diagram in your book, because I'd like you to have the opportunity to watch that video on the reorganization of the cells of a sponge. So until tomorrow, until next time, I'll say bye bye.